In the spring of 2017, David O'Sullivan descended into the small mountain town of Idlewild, California to rest up. He was through hiking the Pacific Crest Trail, having started at the Mexican border, and was hoping to be one of the few hikers who make it all the way up the country to the Canadian border where the trail ends. At this point, however, O'Sullivan still had a lot of ground to cover. He had only hiked about 180 miles of the 2,650 miles that make up the PCT. On April 6, 2017, O'Sullivan sent an email to his parents informing them that he was planning on heading back to the trail late the next morning. He also sent a message to a friend that he was planning on meeting up with about 4 weeks in the future. The two made some loose plans and expected to reconnect just before the time of the meetup. A month went by and the friend reached out to O'Sullivan again, writing, quote, "Hey, when should I expect you to arrive here?" O'Sullivan never replied. The next day, the friend tried again, this time just writing, "Hello?" ? Nobody knew it quite yet, but there was no way for O'Sullivan to reply. And that's because a month earlier, he had hiked back out to the PCT from town and then simply vanished. He wasn't carrying a cell phone or GPS with him, and he had no way to call for help. Years have gone by, and no trace of him, or his gear for that matter, has ever been found. This is the mysterious story and disappearance of David O'Sullivan. I don't use the word mysterious lightly. This is a bizarre one. It's a sad one. We're gonna get into it here, but first, I just wanna kindly ask you to please consider subscribing to the channel. I've said it before, but over 80% of the people that watch my videos right now are not subscribed. So if that's you, you've been watching a few of these, you like them, please hit that subscribe button and help me get to my goal of 300,000 subscribers. Thank you so much to everyone who's already subscribed. Let's get into it. In the spring of 2017, David O'Sullivan traveled from his home country of Ireland all the way to the west coast of the United States to take on a thru hike of the Pacific Crest Trail, or PCT for short. The PCT is a long-distance hiking trail that runs border to border from Mexico to Canada, passing through California, Oregon, and Washington states respectively. O'Sullivan was 25 years old at the time and had graduated from University College Cork in 2014 with a degree in English and philosophy. He was known as a thoughtful, kind, and loyal man, but wasn't exactly an athlete. However, most thru hikers aren't athletes. I've thru hiked quite a bit myself, and I'll be the first to tell you, I'm definitely not one. To try and make up for this, O'Sullivan spent months training before he flew to the United States, doing things like strength training, running, and hiking around in the mountains of Ireland. However, the terrain on the PCT is much different than Ireland. The high elevation portions of the PCT receive considerable amounts of snow, which last well into the spring, and back home in Ireland, O'Sullivan would not get the chance to train in these dangerous conditions. And to make matters worse, O'Sullivan would have no choice but to start his hike in March. You see, you need a permit to hike the PCT, and these permits are granted through a lottery system. This means that many hikers do not get to choose their start date, and March is early in the season. Now, the conditions are gonna vary year to year, but in the spring of 2017, there was still plenty of lingering snowpack in the San Jacinto Mountains. But this didn't dissuade O'Sullivan. He had spent months preparing physically and financially, and on March 22nd, 2017, he stood at the southern terminus of the Pacific Crest Trail and then took his first steps north. And like many PCT hikers before and after him, things started out pretty rough. O'Sullivan started with a very heavy pack, and it seems as though by day 3, he realized that something was gonna have to change. This is definitely one of the most common problems that first-time thru hikers face, but fortunately, there's usually plenty of other hikers around these first-timers that are more than willing to help and give advice. It appears as though O'Sullivan had gotten confused when prepping his gear, writing, quote, "I got my kilos and pounds mixed up when I was measuring it." Fortunately for him, when he made it into the town of Mount Laguna, another hiker and employee at a local store helped him switch up his gear. O'Sullivan later wrote, quote, "I think I've dropped about 12 pounds of equipment since day 1, and I can really feel it. I've been flying ever since. So things were improving for O'Sullivan. He started hiking at a faster pace, and he even hit his first 20-mile day shortly after leaving Mount Laguna. However, it still wasn't easy for him per se, which is something that another hiker actually noted. When O'Sullivan made it to the base of the San Jacinto Mountains, roughly 150 miles into the PCT, he sat down at the famous Paradise Valley Cafe just a short distance off the trail. He was having a meal with another hiker who later wrote in his blog, quote, "I sat down and talked to a fellow thru hiker, Dave from Ireland. Cracked lips and peeling skin attested to his story of losing his sun hat a few days ago. I got kind of a general feeling he was kind of getting slapped around by being out on the trail. That's probably why I was trying to push him towards not trying anything he was not prepared for." But this hiker also noted that O'Sullivan was in good spirits and he hadn't said anything about potentially quitting the trail. Later that day, O'Sullivan returned to the PCT, continued hiking, and a short while after that, he descended into the town of Idlewild, California to rest up and resupply. On April 5th, O'Sullivan checked into the Idlewild Inn, planning to stay for 2 nights. An important note here is that O'Sullivan made the odd choice of not carrying a cell phone on his thru hike. I'm not exactly sure why this is, but my loose understanding is that it was kind of a logistical thing. Like when you come into the US from abroad, you have to like get a new phone or a new SIM card. And I know it's doable, but it's just a little bit of a pain. And so it seems like that maybe was the reason why. I don't think it was like a, oh, I'm going out in the wilderness, so I don't want technology kind of thing, which you do see some people do as well. Because of this, the only way O'Sullivan could access the internet was by connecting to Wi-Fi on his Kindle. And he was having a problem with this. He hadn't brought the correct charging adapter with him from Ireland, which is another problem that international travelers and hikers sometimes have to deal with. And he was actually expecting a new adapter to be arriving in the mail while he was in Idlewild. However, there was some sort of shipping mix-up, and in his final email to his parents, O'Sullivan complained that he would have to get a late start the next day so that he could wait for the post office to open. By now, it was April 6th, and that very same day, O'Sullivan signed a trail register in town for what would be the last time. The next morning, presumably, he hiked out of town, and he was never seen again. Now, obviously, when looking for missing hikers, time is of the essence. The quicker the hiker is reported missing, the more likely they are to be found alive. Tragically, one of the most frustrating aspects of O'Sullivan's story is that even though he was last seen in April, he wasn't officially reported missing until July. You heard that right. Months went by before he was ever entered into any missing persons database. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but the truth is that it really wasn't anybody's fault. Since O'Sullivan wasn't carrying a cell phone, he had told his family that it might be hard to keep in contact with them, and if they don't hear from him for periods of time, not to worry. His mother was quoted saying, "We unfortunately took this," referring to the previous statement to his family by O'Sullivan, "to mean that weeks could pass without news." And unfortunately, that's exactly what happened. Following O'Sullivan's directions, the family didn't raise any alarms until May, when they contacted the Irish police and began asking around on Facebook to see if any other PCT hikers had seen O'Sullivan. They also contacted his bank to see if there had been any activity on his account. When they did this, they actually received some encouraging news. The bank reported to the family that there was still activity on his bank account, and this caused his family to just go back to waiting, hoping that he would eventually send them an email confirming his whereabouts and his safety. However, this email never came. By the end of June, roughly 2.5 months from when they had last heard from O'Sullivan, his family once again stepped up the effort to locate him. And in doing this, they discovered that the bank had messed up, and messed up big, mind you. It was true that there had been activity on O'Sullivan's account, but it was in the form of automatic scheduled payments. No true bank activity had been recorded since O'Sullivan left Idlewild back in April. His family contacted the Irish consulate in San Francisco, and through that they got in touch with an Irish outreach group in San Diego. Eventually, through this connection, an Irish-American police officer in a different jurisdiction from Idlewild became involved and entered O'Sullivan into the state and federal missing persons databases. But by this point, it was July 13th. So much time had gone by, and so when a search was finally started, it seemed unlikely that they were going to find O'Sullivan alive, and I think a lot of the searchers were probably viewing it as more of a body recovery mission than a search and rescue mission. The authorities spent the next few months intermittently looking for O'Sullivan. They used helicopters, they used cadaver dogs, and large-scale ground searches. But then, in mid-October of 2017, they abruptly closed the case and stopped searching. This frustrated the family immensely. But fortunately for them, a group of volunteers refused to give up on the case. Kathy Tarr has been leading the effort to find O'Sullivan since the authorities closed the case. I had the pleasure of speaking with Tarr pretty extensively, and she provided much of the information that I've included in this video. She began her own investigation into what happened after witnessing the displeasure that O'Sullivan's family had towards the effort, or lack thereof, displayed by the authorities in Idlewild. And it's through her efforts, as well as the efforts of all the other volunteers working with her, that I really do believe O'Sullivan will be found one day. I really do think eventually his family will get some answers, but unfortunately, we don't have any of those answers yet. So the big questions here are, what could have happened to David O'Sullivan? How did he just vanish, and what leads have emerged so far? And while we obviously don't know exactly what happened, there are some plausible explanations. On April 7th, 2017, the day that O'Sullivan hiked out of Idlewild, there may not have been any snow down in town, but at the higher elevations, particularly on the Fuller Ridge stretch of the PCT, this was not the case. There was still up to 3 feet of snow, and O'Sullivan had no experience hiking in these harsh conditions. That spring, multiple hikers were injured in the area that O'Sullivan went missing from, and a number of them required rescue. It's due to this that Kathy Tarr believes the most likely scenario is that O'Sullivan hiked out, he was unprepared for the conditions, and either fell somewhere or got lost and eventually perished, and his body simply just hasn't been recovered yet. Many years have passed, but it's still likely that he is out there somewhere. And another complicating factor is that when O'Sullivan left Idlewild to head back up to the PCT, there are a number of different trails that he could have taken. And unfortunately, he left no indication of which one of these trails he was going to take. All of these routes have been searched extensively, but no sign of O'Sullivan has been found yet. Regulations on drone use have also complicated the search, leaving volunteers with little other option than to painstakingly search the areas around the trails, bushwhacking on foot. Now, another intriguing part of this case is that there have been a few unconfirmed sightings of O'Sullivan after he left Idlewild. A trail angel who helps PCT hikers recalled picking up an Irish hiker along Interstate 10 sometime between April 10th and April 15th. The trail angel stated that O'Sullivan then rested at his house for a few hours, and then the trail angel brought him back to the trail. Interstate 10 would have been a roughly 2-day hike from Idlewild, so the timeline almost checks out. However, Kathy Tarr doesn't believe this sighting to be credible because there was other hikers that the trail angel had picked up, and there was other hikers staying at his house, and 0 of them remembered O'Sullivan being there. The PCT is a very popular thing for international travelers to do, so the trail angel could have very easily been confused by the accents. There was also a few unconfirmed sightings of O'Sullivan on or near Fuller Ridge. One witness was 100% sure he saw O'Sullivan at a trail intersection here. However, timestamps from the witness's photos were way off from the timeline, meaning it was almost certainly somebody else. There were multiple other PCT hikers in 2017 that resembled O'Sullivan, such as the hiker pictured next to him right here. I mean, they look almost identical. There were also a few unconfirmed sightings of him further north in Wrightwood, California, which is another popular PCT town, but it would have been nearly impossible for O'Sullivan to have made it this far without another actual confirmed sighting of him or without him making any activity on his bank account. There's also one other frightening theory, one that O'Sullivan's mother expressed concern about in an article that I read. This theory is that O'Sullivan could have accidentally stumbled upon an illegal marijuana grow and perished as a result of foul play. And then a sub-theory of that theory is that maybe he perished accidentally due to an accident, but then his body was discovered by illegal marijuana growers, and so they disposed of it quietly, didn't tell anybody because they didn't want to attract any attention to what they were doing. And while there have been multiple illegal marijuana grows discovered around the San Jacinto wilderness, if O'Sullivan had stayed on or near the PCT, there's no chance that he would have stumbled across any of these. There's never been any additional evidence to suggest this is what happened. And because of all these factors, Kathy Tarr believes that this is a very unlikely scenario. And of course, whenever an individual goes missing, there's always the question of whether or not they simply ran off intentionally to start a new life somewhere. O'Sullivan's family insists that he would not have done this, and no evidence exists that he did. In all likelihood, O'Sullivan remains somewhere off trail in the wilderness of San Jacinto. And as I said a few minutes ago, due to the efforts of Kathy Tarr, I really do believe that he will be found someday. Kathy Tarr's volunteer team continues searching for O'Sullivan and any sign of his gear, and they're taking it seriously, following up on any and all leads that come in. At one point, they even ran an experiment, leaving a copy of his backpack out in the sun to see how it would look when faded. They continue to search to this day, and Kathy even founded the Fowler O'Sullivan Foundation, named after David O'Sullivan and Chris Fowler, who's another missing PCT hiker who I previously did a video on. I'll have a link to that video in the description as well as right up here. The Fowler O'Sullivan Foundation's mission is to, quote, provide assistance to families of missing hikers, connect them to vetted resources, facilitate searches on their behalf once official efforts have been suspended, and support initiatives to prevent future missing hiker cases. They even give away Garmin InReach Mini GPS devices to prospective PCT hikers every single year, which I think is just awesome. I have a link to their website in the description, and I highly suggest you check it out and consider making a donation. They've assisted in solving multiple missing persons cases over the past few years. I know that I have a pretty decent amount of people watching this video right now that will be traveling on the PCT in the future. If you're hiking near Idlewild or San Jacinto, please keep an eye out for any missing gear, especially if you end up off trail somehow. And also, please take note of any places that you slip, accidentally get lost, or just have any sort of mishaps while you're in this area. Make note of them and please report them, because Kathy Tarr will be interested in hearing about them, because they could lead to a new place to check or a new theory about what could have happened, and it could just turn into another lead for Kathy Tarr and her volunteers to check out. To report this information or anything at all related to David O'Sullivan's disappearance, please send an email to info@fofound.org. I want to thank Kathy Tarr for helping me with this video, and I also want to thank David O'Sullivan's parents for giving me their blessing to make this. I really hope they get some answers soon, so please keep them as well as David O'Sullivan himself in your thoughts and in your hearts. Thank you for watching, everybody.